Okay. So, just to review briefly the stuff that we talked about yesterday, we talked about the structure of DNA, the phosphate groups, the sugar groups, that sugar called deoxyribose, and the nitrogenous bases, and how those nitrogenous bases form the rungs of that DNA ladder. So those of you who did successfully fold, or even if you didn't, you can see what's going on there in the middle, and how it's always the same pairs of letters. So A always has to go with T, C always has to go with G. So if I gave you something that looks like this, if the DNA sequence went A, T, C, this is just the question on the next page, G, 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 T, A, C, then what would the corresponding opposite side of the DNA ladder say? It was ATC, GGG, TAC. What's the bottom half going to look like? TAG, CCC, ATG. And then those are going to be the rungs of your DNA ladder. Now, if it is hard to remember the fact that A goes with T and G goes with C, sometimes it can be helpful to have little mnemonic devices, a forward phrase, where the letters in the order they are in tell you how they pair. If that is a way you memorize things, then by all means, come up with a mnemonic for yourself. I'm not going to make you do one and share it like it says here, but I'll show you some examples of a Science 10 class from the distant past. The mnemonic that this particular class came up with was George Clooney ate tomatoes, GCAT, or Addison Trustham. This will tell you exactly what year this was. For those of you who remember Rye and Addison Trustham, if you don't, then you know this is a while ago. Addison Trustham grabs cats. Apparently that's true. Addison was an interesting dude. Or analogies, apples go in trees, cars go in garages. I don't know. A way to memorize the combination of ATCG or TAGC or whatever the order is, as long as A goes with T, C goes with G, or G goes with C. However you want to put that together, whatever memory tool you want to use, go for it. Okay, let's keep going. The function of DNA. We talked about its structure, and now you've seen the structure. That double helix allows it to condense nicely. DNA stores genetic information. That is its sole purpose. But what happens with that genetic information is quite varied. There's all sorts of things happen with that. So, organisms. You guys inherit is the language that we use. You inherit DNA from your biological parents or parent, depending on the kind of organism that you are. If you only have one biological parent, what kind of reproduction had to have happened there? Asexual. Good. That's the whole point of this stuff in grade 9. I mean, there's all sorts of other kinds of animals, too, that can change their biological sex kind of as needed and at a whim. There's a particular kind of fish where the immature ones are males, and when they mature, they become females. So all the particular species of fish starts as a male and ends life as a female, which is an interesting transition to make for every single member of this species. And the females are massive, and the males are all small because they're growing up into their womanhood. Effectively, is what's happening. It's weird. Frogs do this. There are certain species of frogs that do this in the absence of both genders. An adaptation that they have is that select members of their species will change genders. I think To my understanding, it always goes male to female, not the other way. So there's all sorts of kind of interesting exceptions to the quote-unquote rule. But yeah, how sexual reproduction happens in the natural world is a whole set of courses unto itself. So you inherit DNA from your biological parents. The genetic information stored in DNA is found in the order or the sequence. We call it a DNA sequence of bases along one side of the molecule. Because we know how DNA, how the structure works, how the bases have to correspond to another base, you only need half a chain of DNA to know what the entire code is. Because if you've got, like we just did, if you've got one half that says ATC, you know the corresponding part has to be TAG. All you need is the green chunk of DNA to be able to decipher, but you'd need that whole half. You'd need to know that whole half in order to sequence the gene. It's called sequencing the genome for a particular species, and it's a lot of work to do. So the genetic information stored in DNA found in the order or the sequence of bases along one side of the molecule. This genetic information tells each cell specifically what proteins to make. That DNA codes to proteins. And there's tons of different proteins, and they all have different jobs. A protein that you probably don't realize you're the most familiar with is keratin. And it's the protein that goes into making your hair, and your fingernails. Those are the same proteins. Obviously, they structure differently because none of you have fingernails growing out of your hair, out of your head, and hair out of your fingertips. But the protein is identical. Yes, Evelyn. No, but so if you think about how hair and nails are formed, nails have a nail bed buried deep within your finger. Well, not that deep, but deeper within your finger. Hair has a follicle it grows out of, so that protein is being created and pushed out of, well, in the case of hair, it's getting pushed out of your follicle. If it doesn't get pushed out of the follicle, it just stays. If it catches under the skin, that's called an ingrown hair. But that protein is getting added to the chain at the bottom end, and that's why your hair grows. Your hair grows from the base, not from the ends. Yep, it's keratin. It's pure protein. Your nails are the same way. Your nails grow from their beds and push out, which is why you can cut the ends and it doesn't hurt. But you get further in, all of a sudden, you now have a world of pain. Or if you've ever had a fingernail pulled out, it's an uncomfortable experience. So proteins, and that's one example of a protein that your body produces in order to, I don't know necessarily what the function of hair in a human is, because we don't have hair all over our bodies like a chimp would. We don't use it to stay warm. And I'm not totally sure what the point of fingernails are, but we grow them. But you've got other proteins too. You've got a protein called hemoglobin. Hands up if you've ever heard of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what makes your red blood cells red. Hemoglobin is a protein that causes oxygen to bind to your red blood cells for transportation throughout your body. That protein doesn't exist. You don't have oxygen flowing through your blood. Evelyn. When it's deoxygenated, when it gets dropped off on the other side. And it's not. Blue blood is a misconception. Veins look blue, arteries look red. But your blood's not actually blue. Because most people's experience with blood is like, hey, look, my veins. They're blue. Or green, as the case may be. But, don't do this. But should you cut this, you're going to see red blood. Bruising is bruising is your blood cells that have died and are collecting underneath. They're damaged. They leave your blood vessels. They go out under your skin and then they die. So that's why your bruises change color, from that deep purple, and it's the light traveling through your skin that alters the color that you see. If you're able to see anything, that means light has bounced off of it to your eyes. So that you can see my veins. We can all agree that these veins are inside my arm, yeah? I hope so too. That we can see them means light has traveled through my skin, hit my veins, bounced out, traveled back through my skin, and now has made it to my eyes. That's how vision works. If you can see something, it means light has bounced off of it. So you can see these veins, that means light has managed to make its way through my skin and back out. But that process, especially since this is white light, fun fact, white light is actually made up of all of the colors. That's why prisms are a thing. That's why when white light travels through a prism, it shatters into a rainbow. Because all of those colors are contained in white light. And as light scatters, this is a physics lesson for you, as light scatters, different wavelengths of light bend differently, which is why the sky looks blue during the day and red at night. The sunset looks yellow, orange, red, and then the sun's gone. But during the day, it's blue, because the different wavelengths of light scatter differently. When the sun's lights come in like this, the blue is what scatters to your eyes and the red does not. But as the angle of the sun drops and it passes through more atmosphere to get to you, because when it comes at you from the side of the earth, there's more atmosphere in front of it, it scatters differently. You lose the blue and you get the oranges, yellows, reds, sometimes purples. So you don't actually have blue blood. Is all of that to say blood's not blue. Even though your veins look blue, I mean, I don't know what arteries would look like, because arteries are a lot more important than veins. For those of you who don't know the biology, arteries are how your blood makes it from the heart to the lungs, back to the heart, and then out into the body. That's really important, because that's being actively pumped. Your veins aren't actively pumping the same way. They're being drawn back. The blood is getting drawn back into the heart to send back to the lungs to get oxygen and then sent out again. The artery, if you cut an artery, the heart is forcing blood out of the artery, and you're going to bleed out very, very quickly. You cut a vein, you're not going to bleed out. It bleeds much more slowly, because the heart's not pumping out of a vein. It's pumping out of an artery. Totally unrelated to all the things we're talking. Evelyn, have I answered any of your questions? Okay, cool. So, proteins. Proteins are biological molecules made up of chains of compounds called amino acids. Protein molecules make up most of the structure, is the word we're going to use in here, of cells in all organisms, as well as tissues, plants, and animals. So these, when we talk about the structure, your guys' structural proteins are things like muscles. Muscles are a protein. Those of you who said the one meal you're going to eat forever is a cow, we're eating muscle. Muscle is a great source of protein, yeah. That's why you need to eat protein. Because, so proteins are made up of amino acids, and your body, you have to get those amino acids somewhere else. Your body doesn't make all of the amino acids that you need. And so even if you're vegan or vegetarian, you're not eating animal products. Animal products is where most of us get protein from. There are still vegetarian and vegan ways to get proteins. You just have to go out and find those. Consuming protein, you don't need a lot of it, but if you don't get any of it, it's really bad for your body. Other animals' meat just happens to be a really or not even meat, eggs. You're eating unfertilized eggs, a lot of protein, tons of protein, and nothing is suffering as a result of you eating an egg. So I mean, unless you want to talk about chickens and the way they're raised, That's a whole nother conversation. But, I mean, assuming your eggs are free range, you have a chicken, it's living its best life, it eats your compost. As long as there's no rooster present to fertilize that egg's never going to be anything more than what it is when you crack it open. Easy way to get protein, especially if you don't want to hurt an animal in the process. And if you hate bugs, bugs are also a very dense source of protein as well. So, proteins. In addition, various proteins control how a cell is formed and functions. So proteins do a lot of stuff. How a cell is formed and how it functions. The instructions provided by the DNA are therefore responsible for the development of an organism and the function of all its parts. It's weird and wildly complicated. But your DNA codes for all of this. It's weird. And the fact that stem cells are a thing is weird. We can talk about that more later if that's something that interests you. The complete DNA sequence in each cell of an organism is called the organism's, I've used this word before, genome. And it took scientists 13 years, from 1990 to 2003. I was in high school when this was announced. It was a big deal. They finished it in 2003. They mapped the human genome. That doesn't mean they necessarily know what all the pieces do, but they've got a map to help see it all. Yes. There's all sorts of things that are, and now that is a constant source of new discovery. Every time you're able to link something, anytime someone says, oh, this thing has now been given a genetic link, or we know there's a genetic link because there's a higher chance of something happening in twins that doesn't have, or and it's less in siblings, and it may or may not get passed down. So autism is one. There is a speculated genetic link related to causes of autism. We don't know for sure because the whole genome hasn't been, it's not like we know, oh yes, that gene causes autism. But we know that if one twin has autism, there's a significantly higher percentage chance that the second twin does, and that percentage drops for siblings that aren't twins to those two. So I talked to you guys yesterday about my godchildren. The twin boys are both diagnosed high-functioning autism. Their sister does not have autism. But there is, or at least did not present as having autism, but now they're starting to wonder if some of the traits she has kind of put her on the spectrum as well. But both twins definitely have autism to varying degrees. So there is speculation that autism has a genetic piece to it, but we don't know what that is for sure. But now that we've mapped the human genome, we can start looking for these pieces. And then there's diseases, right? One disease called Huntington's is a genetic disease. It is caused by, and we'll look at it in more detail, it is caused by a particular problem, a very specific problem with the genetic code in a very specific chromosome. And if a parent has Huntington's, you've got basically a 50-50 shot because it's directly related to the code, and the code copies itself and then splits 50-50 into egg and sperm, or into the different eggs, into the different sperm. If you're, depending on who has autism, whether it's the mother, or not autism, Huntington's, depending on whether the mother or the father, you've got a 50-50 shot. Which sperm and which egg are coming out of who and combining. And if the wrong pair shows up, now you're going to have Huntington's. It's a guarantee. And you will die. Huntington's is 100% fatal. And there are tests for, for example, like a parent with Huntington's, if I had Huntington's, as soon as we found out my wife was pregnant, I don't have Huntington's. If I did, we would be able to do a genetic test would have been able to do a genetic test of the embryo to determine whether or not my kiddos would have had Huntington's later in life. You know the instant it happens, whether or not Huntington's is in the future or not. That's one specific example. And we know exactly what gene is responsible for that. You had another hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's very similar to this, where it's like, there's like a certain thing. So like, I don't know if this happens with our friends, but
Do you know if cerebral palsy is the diagnosis for the first son? I don't know. Unless you can give me specific things to look up, I don't know the answer to your very specific question. Now you're talking about genetic editing, gene editing, or DNA editing. That is an ongoing area of research with wildly ethical implications. Like now you're talking about, so theoretically you're talking about designer babies. I want my baby to look this ways. I want these particular traits from me. I want these particular, it's more than selective breeding, which was also something that we've done in the past as a human race. Yeah, so like we'll talk about it at the end of this chapter, but for example, here, don't flip to the back because you're going to wreck all my things. That's related. Okay, so this is what watermelons used to look like. That's not overly appetizing. So we bred them. We're like, I want more of the fleshy part and less of the seeds. So you breed, you breed, you breed, you breed, you breed, and now your watermelon looks like this. You find something with a particular trait. You find the sex cells from that thing. You combine it with the sex cells from something that has more of that same trait, and you continue to breed this thing until it looks like how you want it to look. You want to see bananas? Here's bananas. This is what bananas used to look like. I have no desire to eat that. That's what bananas look like now. Okay, for those of you who like this particular vegetable, anyone want to guess what that is? You are wrong. In fact, I will give you chocolates if you can correctly guess what this is. I might give you all of the chocolate I have if you can correctly guess what this is. Who knows what this one is? That's eggplant. This is eggplant. Who wants to take a guess what this is? Yeah, because you saw this picture. Let's not wreck this one. Corn. This is what corn used to look like? Like, no. This is what corn should look like. And we've done this to all sorts of species. We've done this to pugs. If you know someone who has a pug or likes pugs, they have breathing problems because they've been overbred to have weirdly shaped skulls. Pugs are, their existence is basically torture. Pugs did not used to look that way. They used to have a longer snout, but someone decided that a punched-in pug face was cuter than the longer snout, so they bred them and bred them and bred them until they shorten, and then you get this deformed skull, and now you get pugs that can barely breathe. Yeah, their existence sucks, and we've done that to them. So then you want to talk about how could we possibly do this to people? And this is a whole area of science called eugenics, which was kind of part of Hitler's manifesto. The best, the brightest, the strongest are the Aryans, the blondes, the blue-eyed, the tall, the Dutch. Those are the best and brightest, and so we're going to have those people breed, and we're not going to let anybody else breed because other people have traits we don't like. And now we're starting to get into, as soon as you start talking about selecting through the human genome, now we've got into basically we're at the doorstep of the Holocaust. Is effectively where we start to creep. And so it's a very slippery slope because it's something humans have done in all sorts of species forever. So what's one more step? And let's do it here. But there are good reasons to want to be able to edit the human genome. If you knew your kid had Huntington's and you were able to edit their genome so that was out, oh man. So there are lines where you could make compelling positive arguments for things like CRISPR. This is genetic editing in an embryo to, so you don't know, none of you have had kids, I hope. So as soon as you find out you're pregnant, my wife and I found out we were pregnant, we were able to, at different stages throughout the pregnancy, you were able to send away they take I can't remember what they took from my wife, but they took tissue samples from my wife, and they will send them to the government. They're like, do you want to know the percent chance that your child will have a particular genetic condition? And they test for a whole bunch of them. Down syndrome is one. Like, we would have known before my children were born whether or not they had Down syndrome, because you can test for that immediately. So you send this all these things away, and it comes. You get, if you opt for it, when we wanted to know. But even then, there's a whole bunch of ethical reasons. Like, do you find out? Do you not find out? If you found out your child had a particular condition, would you be more likely to terminate that pregnancy? Now that gets really, really dicey. And there's reasons why, even something like sexing a baby, determining what its dominant, what the biological gender is going to be. They don't do that a lot anymore, because there are different cultures, especially in, like, there's a one child. Some countries have used to have what's called a one-child policy, because the population was so great. In China, they had a one-child policy, and it was because the population was so big. The government was like, we have too many people. We can't feed all of our people. You get one kid. So parents were like, okay, cool. If we get one kid, we want to make sure we get the right kid. And daughters are just we have to give away our daughters to someone else's son to marry them. We get nothing from a daughter. We need to make sure we have a son. Our son is going to be the one to help us in our old age, provide for us. In Chinese culture back in the 70s, due to the governmental one-child policy, Chinese parents regularly terminated the pregnancies of daughters for totally practical reasons. When we can make a call on whether or not that was good or bad, but they were for reasons that they deemed necessary. If you were conceived a biological female, it was less likely for you to survive into childhood, because they only get one kid, and the girls get given away. So never mind the ethical and moral implications of that immediate decision. Now, today, that happened in the 70s and 80s. That one-child policy no longer exists. But that happened in the 70s and 80s. I was born in the 80s. In China, right now, there is a whole generation where there is a massive male population and no women. So you've got tons of single Chinese dudes that will never have kids of their own because there aren't women present in their age range to have kids with, because of the one-child policy 50 years ago. It's weird. There's all sorts of, so you got to be, when you're talking about, we've mapped the human genome, this is really exciting. There is a massive, gigantic box of good and horrific questions and scenarios that are present. Let us carry on. The human genome consists of about 3 billion base pairs. Okay, so that is smaller than the number that I told you. I told you it was like 100 billion. It's not 100 billion, it's 3 billion. 3 billion is still a lot. For example, that's 3 million, 1, 2, 3. If I divide that by 3,600, and then I divide that by 24, divide that by 365. Okay, so 3 billion. If you counted, so there's 3 billion base pairs. If you counted to 3 billion, and that's like letters, that's rungs on the human genome ladder. If you counted to 3 billion, counting one number every second, it would take you 95 years to count to 3 billion. And now, Evelyn, you take these 3 billion base pairs and you order them randomly. That number, however many combinations, which is something you'll learn in Math 11, the number of combinations of 3 billion things is astronomically large, which is why you're not going to get twins from different parents, genetically identical. Your kids and my kids are never going to be genetically identical, because the odds of that happening are not 0, but they may as well be. And these 3 billion base pairs are found distributed in the, how many chromosomes do we have as a human race? How many chromosomes? Sorry? 46. There are 46 chromosomes. There are 23 pairs. And you get 23 from each parent because you were conceived not asexually. So you get 23 from mom, 23 from biological dad, whoever that was. And now you've got the code that makes up you. And a chromosome is just a chunk of your DNA. When your DNA condenses, it's not one gigantic chain, it's 46 shorter chains. And when they condense each into their own chromosome. Yes, Evelyn. Your hand went up for a second. Nope.
Because sometimes, like, you know, like diseases or like, not really traits, but just like personality, like, sometimes, and even sometimes with, like, if it's schizophrenia, is that like true for a schizophrenia, or is it just less percentage of it?
Depends on the trait, and that gets pretty complicated. Because there are very few traits that are coded by a single gene. Almost everything we have is a combination of a bunch of genes working together to produce a particular outcome. I am going to wildly oversimplify how genetics works in this unit. Like I did in chemistry, I had to wildly oversimplify things just so that you could understand the beginnings of how things work in chemistry. We're going to do that in genetics. And it's a dangerous, especially in genetics, it's a dangerous thing to do because there's all sorts of, I have this trait, I have this trait. Oh, you have this trait? This trait is better. Oh, I have this trait and I'm white, you have this trait and you're not white? Oh, And that gets really, really dangerous, wildly dangerous, and is the source of so much systemic racism in the world. I want you to be very aware of that. Do not oversimplify and reduce what I'm going to teach you to produce racist arguments, because it's been done for centuries. That's why slavery was a thing, believe it or not. Okay? So teaching genetics, it's more than anything else I will teach you. It's really, really important that we're really clear on some of the outcomes of the implications. Things like genetic editing, things like how we breed different species. Well, why can't we do that to people? We could. We could just say, okay, cool, you have this trait, you can't have kids. It has been, in the history of humanity, that has been done. Is that okay? I'm going to argue it's not, but that's a conversation for another time. So genetics is an interesting beast. It's very interesting to teach, but you got to be really careful how you absorb this information. Okay, chromosomes. Your DNA condenses into these things. During most of the cell cycle, DNA exists in strands called chromatin. This you learned about in lots of detail in grade 9. We're going to cover over it real briefly. Once the cell's nucleus and genetic material begin to divide, is the language here, in mitosis, the chromatin condenses into distinct chromosomes. You learned about this in mitosis last year. The human body, you have different kinds of cells. Regular body cells, does anyone remember what they're called? Starts with an S. Yes, somatic cells. Is the word there somewhere else? No, it's not. Somatic cells have 46 chromosomes because your body cells need to code for all of you. And these are organized into, obviously, if we're talking about pairs, it's 23 pairs. For each pair, one chromosome is either from the mother, well, one is from the mother, and one is from the father. Even these days, this is getting complicated because with things like in vitro fertilization, you could theoretically take 23 chromosomes from one parent in a same-sex couple and 23 chromosomes from the other parent in a same-sex couple. I mean, two dudes doesn't work because YY, if you get the wrong combination of YY chromosomes, that's going to be a problem. But you need an XY or an XX set of chromosomes. So theoretically, you could take a same-sex two women, take the egg from one, the egg from the other, pull the 23 chromosomes out from one, 23 chromosomes out from the other, put them all together into one, and now you've got two parents. But how you combine those 23 chromosomes, like that technology exists now. Call it in vitro fertilization. The godchildren I keep referring to, my buddy and his wife, as far as they knew, couldn't have kids. So they went in vitro, and their daughter, their firstborn, they took 23 chromosomes from my buddy. They took 23 chromosomes from his wife. They put them together into an egg, and they implanted it into her. She successfully gave birth to Olivia, my goddaughter, Evelyn.
So you're saying that would it do the same thing for these kids?
So the female body is a wild thing. The reason why my buddy and his wife couldn't get pregnant wasn't because of, it was because the problem was a very specific problem that her getting pregnant with their first child solved.
Okay.
Just how her body changed as Olivia grew and then was delivered fixed the problem. So they didn't think they could have kids normally. So boom. When you don't think you can have kids and you act a particular way, there's a real good chance you're going to have kids. Yeah. Ethan and Evan.
But then I have another thing.
Yes.
So,
The female body is wild.
their first daughter didn't have autism, and it only took 23 chromosomes from each parent.
Well, I didn't say autism was fully genetic, but Ethan and Evan were only 23 chromosomes from each parent, and they both have autism. Autism is more complicated than that. Again, be very careful not to reduce the concepts that we're looking at here further than they're intended to be reduced. It's complicated. Yeah. So 23 from mom, 23 from dad, and then one of these chromosome pairs, a very important pair. These are the sex chromosomes. And these are the X and Y chromosomes. If you are a male, you have an X and a Y. If you are genetically female, you have an X and an X. Which means, I've had conversations with people in the past, blaming, and it used to be a thing, like in monarchies back in the day. If a woman wasn't producing sons, we're going to kill her and we're going to find a new wife. Yeah, but who's responsible for providing the Y chromosome to make a son? The dude. Woman's not producing sons. Whose fault is that? The dude. Interesting. History, if we knew that back in history, things are very, very different. XX is female, genetically female. XY is genetically male. And there are mistakes that happen with this that make this complicated. You can have two X's and a Y. You can have an X and two Y's. Things get complicated at the genetic. Then what are you? Genetically male or genetically female? Well, I don't know. You've got everything. And now that's a whole other potentially political discussion and moral discussion and ethical discussion. And it gets complicated. Evelyn, go for it.
Okay, so
At some point, I'm going to have to continue going.
on my dad's side, they're like the past like 3 generations of women, it was like only boys. Like, there was no girls whatsoever on my grandpa's, my dad's dad.
Don't know what to tell you.
So like, I'm just asking like, is that like genetic?
Partially, but it's also a little bit environmental because I've had kids, now I can answer all these questions. Sperm that are coated with a Y chromosome versus sperm that are coated with an X. Remember, from a father, you only get one of these, and you get the other one from mom. So if you have an X sperm and a Y sperm, they aren't the same. They function differently. Y sperm are faster than X sperm. I don't know why. I just know that that's true. But they die quicker. X sperm are slower and last longer. They survive longer. So, if you want to try and plan for a particular kid, and I know people who have done this and it works. I have a friend. Her name is Marcy. Lovely woman. She's a NICU nurse. She's actually the reason my daughter survived childbirth, which is great. Love Marcy. Big fan of Marcy. She had twin daughters, and it was like, okay, we're going for one more, and it's going to be a boy. And she's a medical professional. Here's what we're going to do. And she sits, and she told me all this. She was very open with these conversations. She's like, here's what my husband and I did. We figured out how the biological cycle works in her. They timed it. You can get it down to days. And she's like, if we were able to conceive early in the cycle, the chance it was that we were going to have a boy was way higher. The statistics are like 80 to 20. Earlier in the cycle, you're more likely to conceive a male child because those sperm are stronger, but they die quicker. And if you're later in the cycle, you're more anyway. If you time it differently, you're like, okay, I want to have it here. I have a girl. So like we're doing this. Boom. Fourth child, Colton, my friend, who is a dude, and it's more than just XY because there's all sorts of environmental things that are at play. But at its most simplistic level, yeah, XY makes you genetically male. But how that happens, yeah, you can rig the numbers. The odds is not 50-50. The odds are all over the place. Yes, it's crazy. Crazy is the right way to describe it. Man, before I had kids, I had way less of these stories, which some of you might appreciate. I know, Brooklyn, you're counting Evelyn's questions, but that's okay. Evelyn, your questions are getting counted at that table behind you. One of the Brooklyns is counting the questions. See you later. Okay, I'm going to take this to the end of the block. The sex chromosomes. Flip the page. I said it. We're going to write it on this page. RXY. They determine the genetic sex of an individual. Females are XX, males are XY. The sex chromosomes are always counted as a pair, even though X and Y are not similar. The Y chromosome is much smaller than the X chromosome. The X chromosome is a strong, robust chromosome. The Y chromosome looks pathetic if you look at it as a chromosome. I'll show you a picture of it on the next page. The sex chromosomes I said that already. The remaining 22 pairs of chromosomes are called autosomes. I don't know why. That's just what we call them. Chromosomes are paired based on sharing similar characteristics, i.e. they contain the same genes. They might code differently, but the same genes are present in each pair. You would have learned last year this term homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes are pairs of chromosomes that are similar in feature, such as the length of the chromosome itself, the location of the centromere. The centromere, if you look at the pictures down here, these are the centromeres. It's kind of like the anchor for the whole chromosome. It's based out of that location. But they don't have to, they're almost certainly not going to be identical to each other. They just means that they could pair up together. The genes might code for the same things, but they might code differently, and we're going to talk about dominance versus recessivity in genes. Why are you blonde versus not blonde? Why do you have a dimple on your chin versus not? I have a friend whose her husband, no dimple. She has the most prominent dimple I've ever seen right here. And her kids all have the same dimple. Like, all y'all belong to your mom. I know that because it's a very dominant feature, and she passed it on. Homologous chromosomes carry genes for the same trait, such as hair type, or at the same location. However, they can carry different forms of the same gene. This is what I've talked about several times now. Different forms of the same gene are called alleles, is the language that we use. These different forms account for differences in specific traits, such as, but is not limited to, well, I've got straight hair, I've got curly hair. Or maybe your hair is wavy. It's a combination of expressions of the different genes, right? So, for example, if this is a homologous pair, maybe this gene over here, not gene, this chromosome came from mother, this chromosome came from father, and they are a homologous chromosome pair. Their centromeres are in the same spot, and they code for the same kinds of traits in the same spot. So maybe this guy here, this band and this band are, it's not this simple. Let's say it is. Let's say that this is eye color. It's not that simple. We're just going to pretend that it is. That line may be eye color. Maybe mom codes for blue eyes. Maybe dad codes for brown eyes. I don't know what you're going to get. Eye color is complicated. And so you get these pairs of alleles, and now we got to figure out what trait is going to show up based on the alleles that are present in homologous chromosome pairs, half of which came from mom, half of which came from biological dad. These things in the language I'm using are code for the same. And the idea here is, maybe I'll say, instead of calling it a trait, I'll use the analogy of an idea. They code for the same idea. But may we finish tomorrow. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you later. Evelyn, don't stop asking questions. And any of you with questions, feel free to ask them. It's especially in this unit, it's good to get the questions out into the world. Say the questions. See you later, man.